today's question is, what do you do about unfinished user stories? So before we come to the conclusion, it's important to understand if unfinished story, what is unfinished story? So as per the invest criteria, a story should be independent, negotiable, um, valuable, estimated, small, and testable. Uh, so we understand a very important criteria here, that is negotiable. So a user story, uh, once written, doesn't mean it's fixed and it cannot change ever. So there are parameters, or there are conditions where it can be negotiated, like when you progress and you feel that okay, this was something which we thought we could have done in 2 days, but it is technically challenging for the team to implement it, and then those kind of negotiations start with the product owner. So the acceptance criteria might change, saying that okay, this for this particular sprint, we are going to go ahead with this scope, and the extra work which we are speculating, which we have understood that it's much beyond to be completed in a sprint, will be taken up in the as another story, and it will be estimated separately. So this is one of the conditions where those kind of negotiations happen. Similarly, on the functional side, when when the team presents the story to the product owner, not at the last day of the sprint, maybe just once we have done the initial testing, and it is shown to the product owner, then the product owner feels okay, I think you should be adding this verification as well as part of the user story. So in that case, the team says okay, fine, we are going to try it if it gets completed in the sprint, and then later on it is decided that okay, we cannot, maybe we need to take it separately, or we complete it as well. So negotiations are an important part of any user story. So be it from the functional side, be it from the technical side, so those kind of negotiations should and often take place. User story, once verified and signed by the PO, will never change. That kind of mindset is not agile mindset, so that needs to be changed. Now so we have discussed about the negotiations of the user story. Now coming back to the point, like what do we as a scrum master do day in day out when there are user stories which are not completed or unfinished? So if none of the above conditions which I have mentioned below, the scope did not change and nothing was changed, and user story which the team had imagined that estimated and thought that they'll be completing in a sprint, and they don't, so that is a significance that if there are no challenges, apparently there are no unplanned leaves, there are no scope changes, there are no other priority work which from production or anywhere else which team had to align with, that means that that the estimation process itself is a problem. So when I entered, so based on my personal experience, when I entered a new team here, so I saw what I saw, I'm just sharing it out. I saw that every story team used to do some work. They used to show 1 or 2 scenarios to the product owner, and they completed the story at the last day of the sprint. There was no churn, there was no spilling, and then they used to create a new part 2 story, and they used to mention the same things what were mentioned in the previous story. So previous sprint. So what I started implementing, I took the hard decision of saying that we are going to spill the entire story. We are not going to. So when I came as the scrum master for that team, and I saw that 1 or 2 sprints this was happening, and the previous scrum master was also there. So I saw, and then I once I started getting more and more involved. I said this is not something which is acceptable, and we have to have a clear goal, a clear scope, what a user story mentions, and then if that is achievable, we should be doing it and meeting the definition of done. So I started creating subtasks, saying that this is the scope, the coding, the J units, the unit testing, the peer testing, and everything should be as part of the user story, and we are meeting the definition of done, the sonar reports and everything, and only then the story will be marked as completed, else the entire velocity will be lost and it will be moved to the new sprint. So what happened was the team started actually breaking down the stories more and more, because first they came to know what is the scope of the work and the definition of done and how much work they are actually going to get to do in the story to mark it as done. And also they started having that that moment of truth where they understood that so this is not going to work because their velocity is going to get impacted now. So they started breaking down the stories. They came into the practice of breaking down the stories more and more efficiently, and estimating only what and practically committing to only what they could complete in a sprint. So this is for one of the factors. But there are the team started actually breaking down the stories more and more, because first they came to know what is the scope of the work and the definition of done and how much work they are actually going to get to do in the story to mark it as done. And also they started having that that moment of truth where they understood that so this is not going to work because their velocity is going to get impacted now. So they started breaking down the stories. They came into the practice of breaking down the stories more and more efficiently, and estimating only what and practically committing to only what they could complete in a sprint. So this is for one of the factors. But there are always gray areas where the teams actually had scope increase, and where they face challenges, real challenges. So what we started doing it only if it cannot be completed in a release, okay, like we have a quarterly release. So if it can't be part of a release, then we started to give some credit to the team for the velocity front, and we used to create the new stories thereafter. So so the teams where the problem is that the team would say, if you spill the entire story, that much amount of work we are not doing, and we are losing out on the velocity of the new work which can be done. So to answer that, so let's say suppose your velocity is 30 currently, okay, and a 5-pointer story has been spilled. So the velocity for current sprint would be 25. Next sprint, you have spilled 5-pointer and you already have stories worth 30 points, which is already estimated. So now there are some bit of work, maybe 1 or 2 story points of work which is pending. So you can train and you can guide your team in a way that's which is already estimated. So now there are some bit of work, maybe 1 or 2 story points of work which is pending. So you can train and you can guide your team in a way that, okay, so will not do velocity level planning, we will do capacity level planning more. So if you feel that it is the additional things are going to take 1 or 2 days, so you can accordingly do more of a capacity planning where you can involve more and more work. But it would not, so it would be 35, but you are actually doing work which gets completed in 10 days, or it can be actually 32 or 33, whatever. So so the thing is, if you do more and more capacity level planning rather than just plain velocity, now that 5-pointer is there, so I will just estimate for 25 points and do that. That's not correct. So we have taken 5-pointer, now it's 35 in the backlog. We might remove 1 or 2 story point because that is a spill and which team needs to do. So so then the velocity doesn't get impacted, because then this current sprint the velocity would be 35, the previous sprint was 25, so the average is again 30 only, so the average velocity is not going to get impacted. So that's how users.
Hi, for today's question, how do we manage the unfinished user stories? Before we move to the how part, let's understand the why part. Why does a story lead to being uncompleted or unfinished? The reasons can be very minor to very major as well. A few of those can be complexity of the user story. So let's say while we were understanding the user story, we thought that it would be a low to a medium change, but at the end we found it to be a high complexity change. and the estimation that were given at the start of the sprint or during the sprint planning phase, they were not correct, and it was very low as compared to what we actually might require, and hence we don't have enough time to complete that. So complexity, which leads to incorrect estimation, is one reason. Sometimes there are urgent and unexpected production issues. There are some bugs in the current work that we have in the sprint, which lead to our usual work which we have planned for to take a back seat, and then we try and put our efforts on that production issue or that particular bug in the other user story that just keeps on continuing, which again we did not expect. Another possible reason is an unplanned time off for a few of the team members, or let's say one particular person who was supposed to work on the user story. Now, the reason for that unplanned time off can be anything. It can be a sick time off, a family emergency, etc. There are sometimes issues related to infra. There are sometimes related to issues related to our environment that we have to work on. Sometimes, let's say, virtual machine is not working. If it's working very slow. The performance is an issue because of which my current user story, even though the complexity and the estimation, everything is fine, but I'm just sprint, and let's say 25% of the work was still remaining, but my laptop crashed. I could not check in my code on time, and now we have to redo the work since a few days back. Plus, I still don't know when I will get my laptop. So any number of reasons can lead to that delay. But until and unless we understand why it got delayed, we should not be considering that to backlog. And like I said, PO should be the one who should be knowing the reason at all the times, because he is the one who's going to have a say or a final say on the prioritization. Last and very important part of the handling of unfinished user story is understanding why this particular user story was unfinished. What was the root cause behind this whole story being left out? So, like I said at the starting, there can be a number of reasons: complexity, estimation, which can also be because of the bad impact analysis done. Let's say a person being pulled out because of a production issue, n number of reasons. So we need to understand that particular reason, and more importantly, we need to understand if that reason can reoccur, or we are good to consider this for our next sprint planning. Whatever the reason might be, until and unless the root cause of that delay is understood, resolved, or at least addressed, we should not be considering that user story. And PO, of course, should be the person who should know the root reason. If it's an approval which was missed, because of which our let's say access was blocked, it was an infra issue, it was an environment issue, a VM which should have been assigned on, let's say, second day of the sprint, but it was not assigned even until the last day of the sprint, and it might even take some more time. So the root cause of that delay needs to be understood. One of the reason can also be, let's say, a team member was pulled out because of a production issue, and we still don't know when he would be available 100% of the time to the team, and there is not enough time to get training to other team members who can then continue it. There can be another reason, like a team member went on an unplanned vacation, and he is not in a situation to give training or even share what is remaining, and he's still not going to be back for next 1 week. One more reason is, let's say, the code where I was working in, I was almost at the end of the sprint, and let's say it was not done. We need to be able to document that. Let's say one of the key validation is implemented, but one of the minor validations, so let's say the character limit of the login username, or when we log in, there is no feedback like login was successful. So those are minor things which can again be either characterized as a separate user story, as a standalone user story in our backlog, or they can be converted into bugs which are known to PO, which can also be shared with the stakeholders, and they are, like I said, they are minor bugs. Now, let's take an example for that. So let's say there's a login page wherein my UI is partially ready. My backend is able to connect to database, is able to respond to the front end. The database code is written. The queries are working fine, but the exceptions are not working. They are there's some issue, or let's say the error handling is not done, something of that sort. So we can just put up that as a comment and put that as the remaining part, and then move on to the next user story, or just inform the PO. Keep discussing that within the team in our daily scrums. So that becomes the identification part. Moving on to the second part, an interesting one, which is how do you close the user story? How do you understand towards the closure part? Now, there are two parts to closure. Either you move the complete user story to the backlog, and you always move the story to the backlog, you do not move it to the next sprint, or you move partial subtask or partial story towards the backlog. Now let's understand the complete part. You would move the complete user story to the backlog if the user story is not demonstratable. So let's say I cannot demonstrate that in front of a customer. That's one criteria. Next is PO, even though that can be demonstrated, but the PO is not agreeing. No, we don't want to do that. Let's move the complete user story. We are not able to convince the PO, and maybe let's say one of the key stakeholder. We don't want to go ahead with that. So that complete user story just goes back into the backlog, and of course it would be reconsidered in our next sprint planning, or as and when the prioritization is being discussed. Now, when do we consider the partial closure of the user story? Like I said, if the PO agrees, okay, while the login screen is working, we are able to log into the portal. A few of the functionalities, let's say a few of the validations of the screen are working fine, then it's okay. But what is not done, we need to be next is understanding the how part of it. So for that, the first step is of course identifying the particular user story, or the number of user stories that are going to lead to being unfinished. The first and foremost is it doesn't start on the last day or the second last day of the sprint. It has to start somewhere around the middle of the sprint, the latter half of the sprint, wherein we the third question that we asked during our daily scrum, if one of the developers is sharing the progress, the third question is are there any risks or any challenges that they feel around the user story that they're currently working on. An extension of that question is, would you be able to finish this user story on the expected timelines? Or the other flip side of the question is, okay, so you will be able to finish this user story on time. How about the other user story which are assigned to you, which are expected that you would be able to pick up? Would you be able to do those along with this user story within this sprint? So let's say we have 4 more days or 5 more days remaining. So that gives an indication to the developer, kind of a wake-up call that, okay, if you're not able to do the user story, this is a good time to raise your hand, raise a flag, and the particular user story in question can be picked up by someone else. Or if you need help, let's raise the extent to which you would need the help, and someone would pitch in. That's one. So identification is the first and foremost. There can be number of different reasons. It can be a challenge on the technical side. It can be a challenge on the architecture. Any number of reasons can lead to a story being identified as early as middle of the sprint, that this particular story will not be able to finish. Next is understanding the extent or the percentage of the story which would be left unfinished. Now, the best practice is whenever you have a good understanding, try and document it. The way you document that is, you can either put up it in the description, like as a remaining, or the part which is yet to complete or yet to work on, or you just put up in comments after every 2 days, like so and so progress is done, so and so progress is yet to be started with or start to pick up. So all that becomes a live documentation which can be seen, which can be read through in our next sprint planning while we are considering this just not able to progress with the pace that I would like to. So all that leads to the technical side of the reasons. Another reason for a story being unfinished, sometimes is like a developer feels that within the next 2 days I will be able to finish the user story. Sometimes he takes it on his pride, or his ego kicks in, and the time just falls short, or there are too many things to do at the last moment, and maybe even by little margin, but the story still remains unfinished. So that's also one reason.
Hello everyone, today's topic is how you manage the unfinished user story. Now there could be many possible reasons for that team is unable to complete that particular user story. It might be one or it might be more than that for a particular time frame. So first reason could be the unclear definition of done. It is not defined properly and you could find it later in the sprint, and that's why it caused delay in finishing the user story. Next reason could be team has given overestimation of that particular user story. Suppose it has some complexity, but team did not understand it properly and they have given wrong estimation for that, and but while developing the code or might be analyzing more on that, team find out that it has complexity involved in it, so it might require some time. Next option could be that there are some dependency on the BA side or the product owner side, and BA or product owner is not able to. Now next step is how to manage this situation. So now definitely you need to bring this topic in a sprint retrospective in front of the open forum and ask team to identify what should be the root cause for this particular issue. Why there is so much of unfinished work, or there is, if it is a single unfinished work, also try to find out what is the root cause behind that. If it is a clarification which needed from the BA and BA was not able to manage that on time, then definitely have a word with BA and let them make them understand that it is very necessary to give a proper response to the team on time to go ahead with the user story, because otherwise it will be the same problem in every sprint. But suppose there is a major release planned for, and there is 6 to 7 sprint is planned for the particular release, and the same thing happened in the last sprint, then there is no option to push that user story for the next sprint. Team has to definitely work on that. So this kind of root cause need to be identified at the beginning of the sprint, so that at the last sprint there should not be any pressure on team, and team can work on their own pace and finish all the unfinished work on time with less defect. Now the second option is, if there is a dependency on the other team, then BA or product owner has to understand that on prior. They need to analyze the user story in such a way and give the team so that should be independent enough to take up for the particular sprint. Now, if BA or PO is unable to do that, then here SM has to coach the PO or BA in that case and try to make them understand what should be the prioritization technique for that. And this is how you can avoid this kind of situation. Third option is, suppose team has given a lower estimate of that without understanding the user story perfectly. So in that case, team need to coach, or like SM has to give the guidance to the team that they should take up the story, and they should think about what is the complexity of that if they want. Also, like during daily stand-up call, you need to closely look into the particular user story or all the unfinished work which has been pushed to the current sprint. You need to check with the particular assigned person who is working on that to understand whether he or she can able to proceed with the user story, or there is some dependency or some challenges still the particular person is facing. Try to understand what it is, and if there is some communication gap, then try to get a POC detail for the respective team and give that particular person, and or better to schedule a call. And if there is one person which need to be clarified, like one or two user story, then definitely you can schedule a call and ask all the test member or the dev member to connect to the particular person and get it clarified on time. And if there is a TA dependency, then definitely there should be a dedicated TA in the organization or in the particular project. Then team can definitely reach out to the particular person and get it resolved. So in this way, you can able to manage the unfinished work. So that's all from my end. Thank you.
Hi all. So today's question is, how do we estimate unfinished user stories at the end of the sprint? So though it is a common event in most of the team, so how we deal with this, it completely depends on the interpretation of the Scrum and what is the approach, whether we are consistent in that approach or not. So what could be the reason for the user stories to be unfinished at the end of the sprint? So I would like to list few of them. So the first one is, the team member might have been overcommitted than the bandwidth, like there might have not been any capacity planning done, or maybe because of time conflicts or any uncertain situation that that sprint planning might have not happened, and they have started the sprint and there is no proper planning, and because of which the team might have come up with certain uncertainties, or some requirements are not clear, and because of which they are taking more time and they could not complete the tasks on time. And other reason could be, team is doing multitasking and they could not focus on the prioritized task which is assigned to them during the sprint. And few other reasons is because of assumption also. Certain times, like the product owner vision will be different and the team understanding on the particular task might vary, and there will not be any similarities, or there can be certain gaps between the understanding and also the product vision, which could have resulted in the delay of progress of the user stories. And also it could be estimation might have not done. It can be poor estimation, underestimation or overestimation, because of which the team could not complete the task or the user stories which is been assigned during the sprint. It can also be acceptance criteria is it can take the larger effort, but the team did not make time for reassessment, or they have not done any reprioritization for the product backlog, and there is no product refinement session, and because of which they have taken extra time. And along with these reasons, whatever I have listed, there can be any medical emergencies where the team member is not available, and also uh, there can be a situation where there is a single task created for a multiple or the complex job I can tell um, job I can tell. So at that point of the time also team will be taking extra time to complete the task, or team member might not be sure about the logic, or they can have the external dependencies with the other team members, or they are trying, so they are trying to reach out the product owner at the end of the sprint for the requirement clarification, or if PO is not available, and at that point of time also they are not finding any alternative way to get the things sorted, and they're just keep on waiting until the PO is back and they are getting answers for their queries. And along with that, if a team is following like mini waterfall model, then the team starts like all the user stories within the sprint, but they're not able to complete all of them, or they will be either late finishing all the user stories. So I think at that point of time, as a scrum master, we need to encourage the team members to complete the task as much as possible, so for whatever the user stories committed in that sprint. So with all these listed reason, I can tell as a scrum master we need to analyze the trend, whether this the unfinished user stories is a repeated fashion, or is it occasionally or frequently. So we need to analyze, and based on that our approach should be in a consistent manner. I can tell, instead of working on a complex job and creating a thing, so we can create a subtask for that, and the estimation can be done accordingly. So also if we are trying to if we are trying to split the user stories which is unfinished, so then the user story which is newly created will not have any business value, and PO will not be able to prioritize it. So keeping all these factors in mind, so we need to make use of all the scrum ceremonies in order to inspect and adapt in an efficient way, and also to be more effective in our user story planning or creating any task, so that team will not encounter into this situation frequently. And also we have to make use of sprint retrospective sessions effectively to discuss all the issues, or all the reasons what we have discussed before. So based on this we can take a move. Thank you.
Hi all, this is Satish. So today's question or topic or discussion is how do we estimate unfinished or uncompleted user story which is planned in a particular sprint? Yeah, to answer this so on a sprint planning, right? We plan based on the capacity and from the past actually average velocity of the team, the amount of work we plan, and there may be actually many reasons which can arise after when the team started working, right? They may not be able to complete all the works which they have planned earlier. So there may be some of the reasons, like something like they might have faced some network issue, or in one of the case, right, my team, right, we are not able to connect for 3 days to a customer VDI or a laptop crash, since some of them working still from home or in a hybrid model, right? Getting that replacement, it may take some time. So other than this, there can be various reasons which the team might not have considered earlier, some things which they might not have thought while estimating, or some technical which could have arisen, or some issue with the test region or test data. These are some of the things which I could think of might have caused due to this, due to which the team may not be able to complete the planned user story. So in such a case, for example, we are not able to how we are going to estimate it right. So for example, let's consider team has taken a 5-story user point, and they have worked and completed about 2 user stories, so remaining 3. So from my view, you write in this case like that team should not consider this 2 story point as completed work, and they should not include this in their velocity also, because we should consider, and as per the Scrum guide also, right, we should consider and the use story which meets the complete definition of done, only we should consider as completed. So that's one thing. On the other thing, right? So coming to the other thing, right? So we can actually move this story to the product backlog item and see based on the priority in the next planning, right? How do we take it actually? Either take it in the next station or in the later, right? That's actually completely different from the depends on the priority of the product backlog item. It's not always necessary that that the partially completed user stories need to be carried immediately to the next iteration. And also the other reason which I was telling why we no need to take actually the two story points in my example to the velocity is anyway we will be taking the average actually average velocity for 5 iterations, right? Teams were supposing this case 2 story points is completed, next team is going to complete in the next iteration, for example 3 years. So this 5 story point is completed in 2 iterations. So anyway, while taking that last 5 iteration, this 5 story points will come. So based on that only we will plan. If you take in the first iteration itself 2, right? So this shows like we will be planning for in the future next sprint, right? For some work which we already our team may not be able to complete. So we should always plan to take the work which team would be able to complete. Which this will ensure that the team picks only the amount of work they will be able to complete in the iteration. So, and the other way is other thing is I want to sometimes, right, during the sprint planning, if we know that we are not able to accommodate that work in this sprint, right, try to split logically. If it's possible, then take that work. In case if you are not able to split, just don't actually take like 2 user story point in this iteration and 3 in the next iteration. Don't do that. This is my view. So always so for example, the team velocity is 30. If there is already we have taken 25 points. So for example, there is a 8 story point. So don't just take that 5 story points in this iteration and 3 in the next iteration. So here, if we are able to split that user story into 2 or 5, 3, then try to do that. That way we will ensure that team picks only what they will be able to actually, what they will be able to deliver only they pick in the future iteration also. So my view is always like completed, try move back to the product backlog items, and sometimes, right, we need to re-estimate. There is the reason being there may be sometimes technical debt or some additional thing which the team may need some more additional story points to complete. So in that case, we need to re-estimate, and also the priority will change. So moving back to product backlog item and start working on it, right? That's this how this how actually we need to do this from my view for this question. Yeah. Thank you.